I'm also pleased to be joined by my family here, my wife Sarah, my son Zach, and Carlos and Tony, and some good friends that have, over the years, always listened to me speak and always had a smile when I finished my speech, no matter how long I took. But today, Heather has me on the clock, although Heather, I do have the microphone. Seriously, I want to thank all of you for being here this morning. I know many of you have to race back to your jobs, and others could have slept in a little bit and got a little more time in the sack this morning, but you made an effort to be here, and I congratulate you. You made an effort to be here to celebrate Dr. King's birthday and all that entails and what that means to all of us. I also want to thank Heather Miller and the Slater Center for inviting me. I understand I wasn't the first choice, but hey, you know, that's all right. I'm delighted to be here. 23 years, that deserves another round of applause. I remember many years ago when my family lived in Washington, D.C., long before there was a national holiday celebrating Dr. King's birthday. And my daughter, who was about 5 at that time, came home and said, "Daddy, I don't have to go to school tomorrow." And I said, "Well, why not?" She said, "Well, it's the King's birthday, and we're supposed to celebrate." And so I said, "Natalia, we don't have a king in America." And she said, "No, Daddy, it's the King's birthday." And then I remembered that the District of Columbia did celebrate Dr. King's birthday 15 years before it became a national holiday. And so she was right. It was the King's birthday. Now, she went on to become a tremendous trial lawyer, and I never forgot the King's birthday. Traveling back even further, it's been over a half century since Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech, the March on Washington, where a speech of inspiration, a truly iconic speech, a speech of hope and vision about what the future could look like. He gave that to thousands of people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial in the mall. And that speech is deeply embedded in the mosaic of American history, as famous as Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, the announcement of President Kennedy's assassination, and the walk on the moon. But more than remembering the speech, it's important to remember the achievements of Dr. King. Dr. King and his followers really made some incredible contributions. And in many cases, they stood up so we could sit down. They stood up so we could sit down in bus stations, at lunch counters, in public schools, in college classrooms, in legislatures, and in the halls of government. This commitment to justice of thousands of marchers, just ordinary citizens seeking a better world, that's what we're celebrating today. And that brought about a new way of living and things that we never thought were possible before. Now, I am not saying that we have reached the mountaintop that Dr. King referred to so much in his speeches. It is clear that the struggle for justice and civil rights continues daily. You just have to turn on the TV screens or read the newspapers, look on the internet, and you see examples every day of stories of racism, of violence, and of lives lost at the hands of others. As I reflect back on Dr. King's life and lessons, I know that each of us has our own personal thoughts and reflections on those times. Like many of us who remember where great events in America happened, and sometimes tragic, or for instance, remember where we were on 9/11, I remember where I was when Dr. King gave his speech, his I Have a Dream speech. I was sitting in a jail in Muncie, Indiana, surrounded by prison bars as I listened to that amazing, eloquent, powerful speech, the speech that inspired America, and I dare say the entire world. I was mesmerized and I'm moved by Dr. King's compelling plea for societies to come together. I was enthralled by the vision that he held of the possibility of a society free of anger, a possibility of us all to come together, a society that could join together and support everyone's dream of a free and a just world. Now, for those of you who are lost in my jail reference, and no doubt wondering what is a former college president doing sitting in jail, Unfortunately, I was not there to protest some great violation of civil rights, although there were a lot in my home community. And also, fortunately, I was not there because I was being charged with some grievous crime. Actually, I was in charge of the jail. I was the turnkey. And for those of you that are not familiar with the way jails operate, I was the guy that turned the key when you came in, and I turned the key when you went out. I worked as the deputy sheriff of the Delaware County Jail for $300 a month, which came out actually to less than $2 an hour. That was not much money even then, but I did it because I wanted to go to college and pursue my own dream of becoming a lawyer and being able to make changes in my life. That summer, I remember hearing throughout the community that there was going to be a march on Washington, protesting racial injustices in America, and I desperately wanted to be part of it. But I instinctively knew, without even asking my boss, the sheriff, if I said, hey, I want to go to Washington for this march, I would not be marching back to my job. Nonetheless, on the day of the speech, as I was sitting there listening to it, I was deeply moved, hearing what I knew instinctively was one of those great events in American history. I agonized over my inability to be there and be part of it, part of an event of a lifetime, part of history in the making. So somewhat subdued that day, I went about my regular job, taking custody of those who were arrested, sending cars to answer emergency and sometimes mundane calls, and monitoring the routine activities of the jail. Now that summer we worked 12-hour shifts, and so a long day passed into an even longer night, with me continuing to wonder how many more great events in history would I miss. It was in the wee hours of the morning when two white city police officers brought in a heavily intoxicated African-American man. I let them in the jail. I escorted them to the processing desk, and then I returned to my office to answer a call. All of a sudden, I heard a scuffle in the hallway and raced out of my office. And just then, I saw one of the officers with a fist raised to hit that man. And I said, no, not in my jail. This is not happening here. I'm in charge of this operation. And so we began to stare down. This veteran police officer didn't know how to react to a 19-year-old kid that told him he had gone too far. But he backed off and walked out the jail. Even though I was only 19 years old, in fact, the youngest deputy sheriff in the state of Indiana, and had been on the job less than 2 months, I knew the difference between right and wrong. And as I think back to that moment, which is still vivid in my mind, I don't know what gave me the courage to stand up to those two veteran officers, but I felt I had to do it. I felt I had to stop it. And thank God I instinctively did. That morning as I walked home, I said to myself, well, maybe I didn't make the March on Washington, but God felt this is where I needed to be. And so from then on, I learned to play the hand that I was dealt. Now, looking at me, you might be wondering, why was I so interested in protecting this man? Well, first, as Dr. King himself would tell you, it is not the color of your skin, but the content of your character that determines how you act under difficult and dangerous circumstances. And what defines a human being is what they will do. And I was only doing what any citizen should do, making a difference and making sure that people were treated fairly and justly. Now, we all travel different paths to move forward in our lives, and ironically, the path through those steel gates of the jail was my way out of the segregated housing projects of my youth, a place where I had spent the prior 9 years as a mixed-race boy with a black father and abandoned by my white mother. In the first 9 years of my life, actually, I lived as a rich white boy in Northern Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. Then my father's alcoholism led to the disintegration of our family, and my mother left with 2 children, and she never returned. After my mother left, we lost everything. Everything we had. Cars, homes, business, even boyhood pictures, trinkets, and small mementos of the brief moments of joy that we had together, in fact, became the detritus of our lives. As many of you may unfortunately know, living with an alcoholic, when you live with an alcoholic, nothing is permanent, and life can be changed in a flash, irretrievably. Alcohol held my father in its ruthless grasp and uncaring grasp, as it does in most families, and it crushed the dreams of me and my 7-year-old brother. I remember after we lost everything, we climbed on an old Greyhound bus carrying our meager change of clothes in an old tattered canvas bag. But still my brother and I were full of hope and belief that anywhere would be better than where we were. But it was not to be. Late that night, as I sat on the Greyhound bus as was traveling across the country, my dad confessed to me that he was black and had been passing as a Greek or Italian for years. And he warned me that once we arrived in his hometown, Muncie, Indiana, we would be treated differently. In fact, in the vernacular of the times, he said to me, he said, look, in Virginia, you were white boys. In Indiana, you're going to be colored boys. And people are going to treat you differently. You're just going to have to learn how to live with it. So in 24 hours, I had a total identity switch. All we thought about, who we were, where we were from, or where we were going, vanished in a 5-minute conversation. Fearful and uncertain when we arrived in Muncie, we got off that bus and we walked down the railroad tracks to my black grandmother's home at 601 1/2 Railroad Street. And there was no joyous reunion. Once we ventured out into the community, my brother and I were chilled by the scorn and rejection that was shouted on us by both blacks and whites. Our mere presence upset a rigidly segregated society. And I ask you this morning, not for me, but for other young children, what danger could a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old do in the world? And you know, when I look at these immigrant children who are coming across and leaving war-torn areas and see, police meeting them with masks and gloves on, my heart goes out to them, because I know what it's like to be one of those kids that is dragged behind, and yet they're met with the masks and the gloves. Now, I spent many years trying to make sense of the wretched poverty and racial hatred that shaped my life growing up in the middle of the housing projects in a town that detested and despised racially mixed children. Now, both my grandmother and my father were alcoholics, so my brother and I had to fight this poverty and race battle on our own, alone. And unfortunately, again, lost children fighting battles adults will avoid is not all that uncommon even today. Yet amidst all that grief and rejection, there were some bright spots. And my brother and I were truly blessed by God. They say God will not give you a burden that you cannot carry. But God knew we could not carry this burden alone. And we are forever grateful that one of our neighbors saw the danger and the futility of our situation and reached out to us. And no doubt she was guided by divine providence. Now, I know many of you know what it's like to be raised by your grandmother, your aunt, your uncle, or cousin, or friend. And despite the earlier riches that we had enjoyed in our life, in our white life, our life at 601 1/2 Railroad Street was harsh and uncompromising. But a neighbor and a friend, Dora Weekly Terry, found my brother and me, and without any legal formality, and even though I'm a lawyer, if she'd gone in to ask for it, she wouldn't have got it anyway. She took us. She moved us into her house, and we became her boys. She was a 52-year-old black woman making $25 a week. And even during those days, that was not any money. Though she had virtually no material wealth, she reached out to 2 boys that no one wanted. Even her own church sisters in Muncie Black Pentecostal Church said to her, "Sister Terry, why are you taking those boys? They got white relatives, they got black relatives who could be taking care of them. Why is an old widow woman like you, Sister Terry, going to take those boys? But as I later learned, Sister Terry had a mind of her own. And thank God she did. She was undaunted, and she was willing to reach down to pull us up. People often marvel at the fact that I have 11 degrees and have served as president of 2 great universities and have received countless honors and awards, but a smile crosses my face when I realize they don't know the rest of the story. They don't know. They don't know that all of my achievements are built on the lessons of hard work and honesty and lessons that I learned from holding the hand of a woman with an 8th grade education. They don't know as we walk down the streets of my hometown, strangers would stop and stare at us, wondering what are those 2 white boys doing with that black woman? But she was the only mother that we ever knew. Some people tell me that one person cannot make a difference. Well, if that was the case, I would not be here today. I would not be speaking to you. I would not have done all the few little things I've done in my life without the help of one person, without the help of one poor widowed woman who cleaned houses, she washed clothes, she cooked for a white family so my brother and I could have a safe place to sleep, enough to eat, and be with someone who really cared about us. So one person can make a difference. And one person combined with many others can in fact change the world. How many of you remember the primary election of 2008? How many of you thought Barack Obama could become President of the United States? And I remember listening to the announcement of his candidacy in Springfield, Illinois, which is the same place that Abraham Lincoln, also from the heartland, announced his candidacy for the presidency of the United States. And as I listened to then Senator Obama, I wondered, can he get elected? And he won the Iowa caucus. When he won that, I was filled with hope and optimism and hope that we were really going to change. And in fact, he did become the first African-American president of the United States, as we all know. Now, 2016 is another watershed year for America. You've seen the Republicans and Democratic debate. Hey, they've been on TV every time, right? You've seen them. The choices could not be more crystal clear. And even though you may think you are just one person, you have the ability to influence this election. Much that this country stands for is at stake. And this is not time to step back and let it pass by. Now, I remember when my father went through a period of sobriety and decided that he wanted to run for public office in my hometown. I didn't think he had much of a chance because it was clear to me that the local political party did not want either a black man or an alcoholic to serve in office. In fact, some of the party officials went out of their way to personally tell me that he was going to lose. Tell me, arrogantly, that the party was lined up against him. Now, I couldn't share that with my dad because I thought that would then send him back to the refuge of the Bible. But he campaigned day and night, and when all the tabulations were done, he had won by 20 votes. From then on, we called him Landslide Williams. But I realized that 20 people made a difference because they stepped up and said, no, we are not going to do this. We are going to make a difference. We're going to put this man into office. And he did. Let me end with this thought. There are many quotes from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King that live on in our memories, but the words of his that have stayed most with me are remarks he made in a 1965 speech. He spoke about many aspects of character. One was commitment. commitment to a cause, commitment so deep that it gets down into your bones and becomes part of your life and being. And I often think about the people in my life who had that kind of commitment, the kind of commitment to fight injustice, no matter the odds or where the injustice came from. And they're often ordinary people, not celebrated public figures, people like Miss Dora Terry, who took my brother and me in, raising us as her boys, people like my dad, who was often knocked down, but always tried to get back up. And all of us face adversities in one form or another, but adversities do not give us the permission to turn back or stop. In fact, I would suggest that adversity should instead provide us with the impetus to want to work for justice. The adversity should be channeled into constructive change, to commitment to making something into something greater than yourself. Let me quote briefly from Dr. King's speech he gave in 1965. If a man happens to be 36 years old, as I happen to be, and some great truth stands before the door of his life, some great opportunity to stand up for that which is right and that which is just, and he refuses to stand up because he wants to live a little longer, or he's afraid his home will get bombed, or he was afraid that he will lose his job. Now, he may go on and live until he's 80, and the cessation of breathing in his life is really the belated announcement of an earlier death of the spirit. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for that which is right. A man dies when he refuses to take a stand for that which is true. So we are going to stand up right here, letting the world know we are determined to be free. All of us have benefited from the commitment made by Dr. King. It is through commitment, not just of great leaders by Dr. King, but individuals like you and me. It's through us that change happens. Each and every day, we can bring about a better world by carrying out our commitment as part of our lives and in our relationships. May Dr. King continue to inspire you and me and all those that come after us. It is a long and continuing struggle. But as Dr. King often said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. God bless you. Thank you.
That's another amen moment, I tell you. That's right. What a story. That's Thank you so much, Dr. Gregory Williams. Let's give him another hand. And think about what he said. What is the possibility of us all coming together? Just think about it. With that, we're almost finished. Amen. That's right.